But I'm from iAfrican here, editor-in-chief at iAfrican. Deep learning in Indaba, it's been amazing. The train has left the station. It's very beautiful. Keynotes after keynotes after practicals. So many things are happening. I'm sitting with Professor Verena. Professor Verena gave a keynote on the very first day. She was actually the first keynote speaker, and we have the lovely opportunity of sitting, sharing insights, sharing minds, and tapping into her beautiful memory and brain. Prof. Verena, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. Excited to be here.
Prof, let's start from the beginning. How did you get the invite to the Deep Learning Indaba?
I pretty much got an email out of the blue saying, do you want to be a keynote speaker? I've heard of Deep Learning Indaba before. It's very well known. A lot of my colleagues have been at Deep Learning Indaba. They speak very highly of it. Lots of the organizers are from my organization, so I work from Google DeepMind. There's a very big presence from Google DeepMind, including sponsorship. So I was excited to go and find out what all the excitement is about.
I was listening very attentively in your keynote, and you said this is your first time in Africa, and it's your first time in Rwanda. How's your experience been?
It's a wonderful country. I
Wonderful.
took the opportunity to go on a little holiday. So over the weekend, we and my colleague, we explored the country, and I'm very impressed. It's beautiful, it's green, people are very friendly, very welcoming. I felt right at home. Food is delicious.
Wonderful.
Very, very keen to come back one day.
Yes. Prof, let's go a little bit deeper. Prof, off the back of, the first time being in Africa, being at an AI machine learning conference on the continent, there's a bunch of challenges that we face, right? One of those challenges is low resource languages, data sets on African languages. With your experience, outside of just collecting more data, what sort of techniques can we use, in sort of, pooling that body of knowledge? Because, collecting data is quite an expensive exercise. And, in certain countries where there's no budgets and there's no manpower and capacity to collect all that data, what techniques do you think, a continent like Africa should be using?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, what you're describing is generally known as low resource languages. They do exist all over the world. And there's a very active research community around that. Of course, you always need a little bit of data. So, it's very hard to do a new language with zero shot. So, data work is very important. And I think that's also a very unique contribution, which people shouldn't underestimate how important it is to collect good data. But then on the modeling side, I also think we now have an opportunity that these models, can actually learn with relatively small data sets. There's also, obviously research into not just the post-training side, but also the pre-training side, which is more and more important when you switch to new languages. And I think that for African languages, there are two important venues here. So one is tokenizer-free language models. So things like diffusion models, for example, diffusion text models, because a lot of under-resourced languages or languages in general, which are not Western languages, have a different tokenization to Western languages. And so tokenizer-free languages, tokenizer-free models becomes more and more important when you move to more diverse languages. The other thing which I think is very important for African languages as well is native audio models. Because from what I understand, a lot of these languages are mainly spoken, and the people who are using the languages are also mainly using them orally, meaning they are not necessarily able to read or write that language. So for a language model, obviously, the audio input-output interface would be the primary way they would access the model. So I think these are two very, very fundamental and interesting research directions, which, go well beyond collecting data, but are like super fundamental of how we build these models.
Prof, these models are very interesting, right? And one of the keywords that comes up when you're talking about models and data is the whole concept of AI safety. It's a big theme. It's discussed everywhere. It's one of the topic, that is very central at the Indaba. Now, you have colleagues from different parts of the world. You're based in Europe, but your colleagues are scattered all over the world, and that's beautiful. Now, you've argued that AI safety is not universal and it has a lot of diverse values, right? I want to know, how should we look at this global system to define and look at AI safety?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think you also previously mentioned that, there is a maybe slightly different perception of what AI safety really means. And that, maybe in the Western world, there is a focus more on existential risks, whereas like topics like inclusion is also very important. And I think that's, another way to like reconcile different values. So I want to stress that, at Google DeepMind, we are both looking at existential risks, but also including things like inclusion, fairness, under-resourced languages, geographical diversity is very, very important. So in my keynote, I presented this idea of reward misspecification. So basically, if you exclude a certain group, you underspecify your reward function in learning. And that leads to very severe implications for that excluded group.
Yes.
Now, the framework I'm using is very deliberately chosen because that's the same framework we also approach X-risk, existential risk. So the idea of existential risk is that a lot of the failure mode comes from underspecified reward functions, or what they also call reward hacking.
Okay.
So the model, basically, you tell the model to produce paper clips, and the model produces paper clips, and in order to do that optimally, it has to like shut down the electricity cycle. So that's sort of their, extreme case of like how reward misspecification could happen. That, you give it a goal and the model sort of misinterprets that goal. And I think we can frame inclusion in a similar way. If we don't include different viewpoints, then, we misspecified the reward. And in my keynote, I also argued that reward misspecification doesn't just lead to exclusion, but it actually leads to active harm, meaning that the model, in order to optimize its overall utility, extracts resources from the excluded parts. And I think framing it that way sort of bridges the gap between these different communities, and people then also understand why inclusion is like part of this existential risk safety, because it leads to things like, like reward hacking, power seeking through the model, and that having different voices would be a way of also preventing that.
Prof, the beautiful thing about you is that I can tap into both your academic and your enterprise hat, right? You've co-founded Alana Africa. You're one of the co-founders. Can you just explain, what was the thinking behind Alana Africa? I mean, Alana AI, sorry.
Alana AI, yeah. Unfortunately, not Alana Africa. That would have been nice.
That would have been a nice title, right? That would have been a nice name for a company.
I would be very excited. But yeah, so I was a professor for many, many years. I went through the whole academic ladder. I started as a PhD student. I became a postdoc. I became a lecturer. I became, assistant associate, and then finally a full professor. And I really, really enjoyed being an academic. It was, a very hard decision to leave this behind. But partly, I think I got interested in that entrepreneurial spirit. And we set up a university spin-out, which we called Alana AI. And that was really based on a system which my students developed. So they were also co-founders, my students. And we developed the system for the Amazon Alexa challenge.
Okay.
which is a challenge organized by Amazon, where university teams get selected to put their chatbots online and they interact with real Amazon customers. So for us, that was an amazing challenge. My students were super excited. So we built a bot, and that was really at the very, very early stages where, you just had a glimmer of LLMs. They weren't really LLMs. We had like LSTMs, they were called, or gated RSUs. And so there were like different models which didn't work that well. But, we got excited that you now could learn this conversation from data. And we played around with these models. So we had like very similar ideas which we implemented. So we had like multi-agent architectures, and they would sort of then, the model would learn to select which agent based on feedback from real people. So very similar to, nowadays, but before we had LLMs. But what we found, which was similar to nowadays, was like safety issues which encountered. So our models would say the most outrageous things. And we were so naive at that point. We didn't know that this would happen. So we looked at the data and we thought, oh my God, our model said that. And then Amazon also said, look what you said. Like if you can't control your model, we need to shut you down.
Wow.
So we were like, okay, there's on the one hand this exciting research where we have these early LLM type systems.
But then how controlling a model, how does that look like? What does it mean to control your model?
Yeah, exactly. So in the good old days, we had rule-based systems where they were tightly controlled. We knew exactly if the user says X, our model says Y.
Why? Okay.
So they were like tightly controlled rule-based systems in the good old days. And they were suddenly met by these language models, which you can't control very much, at all. And that was a very interesting challenge to us to like figure out how can we basically marry these controlled approaches, but which are limited in their domain, with these new type of exciting systems which are starting to arise. And that was then a challenge we implemented in the system, in our Amazon Alexa system. And we had very good feedback on that. And that's also where we decided, let's spin out the company because, our students were excited. They wanted to continue doing that. And we thought that was an important project to work on.
100%. Prof, we're in an AI summer. We've been in AI summer for a while now. There's a lot of technology being put out. There's a lot of incorporation, AI transfer, AI digitization, you name it. There's so many keywords. What do you look forward to? You are in the middle between academia and enterprise. What gets you excited? What's happening now that we should be looking for in the next year or two?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think, we are very optimistic about AI. It will be interesting to see whether there are limits to scaling. I think that's still an open question. As an academic, with my research hat on, I think, sort of the next big breakthrough is probably through a step change like LLMs were at the time. And that's very hard to foresee. I don't think at the time we really expected it to be such a big breakthrough, because even the early systems I mentioned before, the LSTM systems, they had various problems. They didn't work that well. And then suddenly, transformers came along and it worked out of the box. So I think we probably will need a step change like that. Very hard to predict what that step change will be. But in terms of applications, what I'm really excited about, 2025 is the year of the agents. If we look beyond that, we also have very interesting research on world models, which I think is fascinating, like how do agents move in the world? And then obviously also robotics, once the agents are embodied, how do they, physically also interact with the world? So, I think that's that. And there's a lot of open questions there also for safety and security in this new domains we're starting to explore.
She started out as an academic, went into enterprise. Now she's a professional researcher at Google DeepMind. Prof, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being in Africa. Hoping to see you more. I know you said you went to go see the silverback gorillas. How was that?
It was absolutely amazing. Once in a lifetime experience.
Yes.
I never forget that. It's very, very special to see these amazing animals in the wild. Yeah, the hike was quite something.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
Yes.
It was a challenge, but you experience the beautiful nature, you experience the beautiful animals. It was wonderful.
Live from the University of Kigali in the exhibition hall. It's busy. People are having coffee. Companies are exhibiting. We're in the middle of it. Follow me, follow iAfrican as we cover the deep learning in Indaba. It's going to be beautiful. We out. Thank you so much, bro.